Have you ever learned a term that you didn't know had a name, but you were experiencing that thing, and then once it had a name, it like opened up a whole nother dimension of understanding? That's how this term, or these two terms kind of were for me. So the term that I heard and then understood was ontological shock. And so in order to understand what ontological shock is, I had to know what ontology is. Understanding those two things, it made so many things make sense to me. And so I wanted to share those terms, ontology and ontological shock, with you today. For those of you who don't know, some of you probably already know what that means, but for those of you who don't know what ontology and ontological shock means, I wanted to share that today in hopes that it makes a difference for your life, because it sure did for me. So ontology is essentially, I believe it's a segment of metaphysics and psychiatry, but ontology is essentially your understanding of reality. And so ontological shock is the feeling of profound disorientation when you find out something that disrupts your understanding of reality and your existence as a whole. And so if something does that to you, you can understand why it would be considered shock. And I assume a lot of people have experienced that in one way or another. I definitely have, especially over the last decade or so. So in other words, this ontological shock, this feeling, happens when you discover something that forces you to reevaluate your worldview. And so what could that be? And honestly, it comes down to the things that we generally talk about on this channel, and it has to do with things that revolve around your identity. So religion, politics, personal relationships, things like that. And so if it has to do with something that is core to you, something that means a lot to you or to your identity, when you discover something new about that, it can produce this feeling of ontological shock. So just as an example, I have a friend who recently found out something about one of their parents, and this information drastically changed their understanding of both their past and their present, and it modified the reality that they believed that they were living. And so they were experiencing ontological shock, at least temporarily. So some of you might be wondering what the difference is between cognitive dissonance and ontological shock. From what I understand, cognitive dissonance is the feeling you have when you hold two contradictory beliefs. And so cognitive dissonance can technically happen after ontological shock if you try and hold two conflicting beliefs after getting new information. So in other words, when you get new information that modifies your reality, you experience ontological shock. Cognitive dissonance is that feeling that sets in afterwards if you do not modify those beliefs and you try and hold two beliefs in your brain that don't make sense together. So I think ontological shock can tell us two things about the human condition. The first one being that when humans hold beliefs, these beliefs can be incredibly resilient, and they can produce some deep distress and profound disorientation when those beliefs that are deeply held are challenged or disproven. But at the same time, the fact that people experience that shock shows that they are changing, that it is the first step towards change, that these deeply held, firm beliefs can actually change. And while that process may be incredibly painful and difficult, producing ontological shock and cognitive dissonance, I think it shows that there is hope for people to get out of their deeply held beliefs if those beliefs are false. But anyways, so the point of me sharing this, I think, is three things. First, once you understand and give something a name, then it destigmatizes it. It's not that big of a deal. And secondly, you can recognize it more easily in yourself. You'll know when you're experiencing ontological shock in the future. You'll be able to name it. And third, and probably most importantly, is that it allows you to have empathy. It allows you to see it in someone else and empathize with that feeling, because I think most of us have experienced at one point ontological shock and how disorienting that can be. But anyways, I loved learning about this. I felt like it opened up so many doors in my mind, and it put words to an experience that I have had multiple times, and it opened up my understanding. And so if this was interesting to you, if learning about this stuff is fun, let me know in the comments, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you in the next video.